So we're recording,
I
and
got it.
I will edit on the back end. So whatever, I'll probably add the
Okay.
voiceovers and everything else. So nothing to sweat. Wasn't sure how you wanted to go about this because I know you're Mr. Notes. I'm more. Let's fucking wing it. Let's give it the old college
Well,
try.
I'm not really Mr. Notes. But no, I some things I kind of we had talked before.
Mhm.
Definitely, I think we have some very different takes on Romero and Fulci and the crossover.
So you want to
So I
start
think
with
that's definitely
Zombie
something
then?
great to talk about. Yeah, oh wait, I mean, Zombies the best to start with because that was, it was Fulci's first official horror film. Because the Gialli technically fell more under the thriller category in Italy.
Okay.
And that's a whole interesting history and everything, but it made it possible for the cycle to happen.
So we're gonna call
So,
it Zombie, or are we gonna call it Zombie 2? What's more respectful here? And is it Zombie with an I,
well,
or is it Zombie with an IE?
here's the weird thing. So, okay, so one of the reasons why there's this whole thing between Romero and Fulci
Fulci.
is because um they were going to release it as Zombie. It was
Mhm.
the script was Zombie, and then they were going to market it as potentially Zombie 2. He actually took them to court. He tried to get the film pretty much seized, and it was all based on semantics. The judge eventually said nobody owns the word zombie,
Yeah.
and that was it.
And
Now, did the
besides, it was
Zombie
Day of the
2
Dead
become more of an
stateside. So
international
why
thing?
did,
I
or
don't
not
know.
Day, Dawn of the Dead stateside. So why didn't I
Dawn
just
of the
call
Dead.
it Dawn of the Dead over in Italy? And just been done with it.
It was a marketing thing that Argento did. I think it makes a lot of sense because in Italy there really was no background in Night of the Living Dead. So it. I think he was trying to separate it from the original film for Italy because there was no real massive reference point in Italian culture for Night of the Living Dead like the United States.
Yeah, and Argento, from what I understand, had his own cut of
Oh,
Day
his
of
own
the
cut.
Dead.
I
Yeah,
actually, I'm going to say something very horrible. I actually like
it's better.
Argento's cut better. Yeah, it's better. Goblin's music actually fits beautifully
Hmm.
because, of course, George's, literally hand to mouth. It's all stock cues. So, which in that film and what that film represents, it actually works. But as a just a drive to the film and a pacing, um, Goblin's score is utterly amazing.
Oh yeah. I mean, not
Mm-hmm.
there's really nothing wrong with like Dawn of the Dead. I'm a big backer of Day of the Dead, so I immediately want to
Mm-hmm.
tack that on. But
Uh,
Dawn of the Dead, it is a decent movie for the 70s. Because I'm gonna say, what was that, 77, 78?
78 because Zombie was 79.
Mm-hmm.
It was released in Italy in 78. Let's put it that way.
Okay. And this is why folks that are listening, we're recording, so they'll be
Mm-hmm.
listening later. But this
Mm-hmm.
is why I refer to the zombie hole as something I want to travel down sometime, because there are many movies underneath the title of Zombie, be it Zombie 1, Zombie 2, Zombie 3, and depending on the region, the numbering can be way different, and there may be other films that are kind of roped into it. It's
Well, I mean,
all,
there is a distinct zombie cycle
yes.
that happens in it. Um, where that all lies, I mean, there are other films that the zombie was a problematic item to begin with because there really was no literary or film archetype You could argue Frankenstein was a zombie. The
Mm,
Mummy very much comes under a zombie concept. But as
Fleshcraft,
far
The Curse.
as, I mean, yeah, the only real backing as far as was, the Haitian zombie concept. And of course, Val Luton did I Walk the Zombie. Of course, the classic pre-code white zombie. And both those films go from the mystical voodoo end.
And a more modern
Um,
take
you
would, of
know,
course, be Serpent and the Rainbow.
well,
Um,
Serpent and the Rainbow, which is amazing. Why can't I think of the gentleman's name? Wade Davis.
okay.
It's the Wade Davis story. Wade Davis. Some people have trouble calling him an anthropologist, even though he's well published and he's a PhD. But he basically the film was about Wade Davis, and Wade Davis, kind of became the anthropologist that made the circle of the popular cult shows and stuff like that because he whoops zombies exist. So
But yeah, it was basically like the whole voodoo aspect of a
yeah.
mindless slave. And I want to even say like that third Tales from the Crypt rituals, the movie Tales from the Crypt. Yes, the one where they awfully gave the Crypt Keeper dreadlocks. And then on top of
Oh
that,
yeah, I remember that.
it was what's
Mm-hmm.
her name from Dirty Dancing? Lead character.
Jennifer Grey.
Yeah, Jennifer Grey had just had her nose job and
Mm-hmm.
she's in it. And completely
Mm-hmm.
unrecognizable. And you could tell that it was shot and they were trying to seriously get a theatrical run on it, but it didn't
Mm-hmm.
get like actual release until later on because Tales from the Crypt was kind of on the way out and it wasn't exactly one of the
Mm-hmm.
stronger stories. I mean, how I'm the type of person who will argue all day long that Bordello of Blood should have been the first Tales from the Crypt movie instead of Demon Knight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I enjoy Bordello a lot better. I think Angie Everhart can friggin' nail a
Mm-hmm.
villain. I'm sorry to say.
Is that Billy
Not
Zane?
yeah. Zane did a
That's Billy Zane.
great villain in that. Great, and
Mm-hmm.
Jada was also great in Demon Knight. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Angie Everhart just nailed something in that. She had because with most vampire movies, most of them don't focus a whole lot on the old sexuality of it, at least modern
Mm-hmm.
tellings from the 90s and the early
Mm-hmm.
2000s. And now we have sparkle vampires. Or well, hell, that was almost 20 years ago now. Jeez. Oh, time thy
Yeah.
swinger. But
Yes, the sparkling vampire is now nostalgia, boys and girls.
yeah. But the
So
thing
we can
was,
now officially say that it is part of vampire canon. So,
unfortunately. What's
mm,
her name from those films did redeem herself. Underwater, great flick. I think it
oh
needs
yeah,
more attention. A secret H.P.
and
Lovecraft
Patterson.
film, whom we'll circle back to here eventually at some point. We go
Mm,
on tangents. Hashtag tangent. But no, like the vampires with the
mm,
sexuality, like you didn't see a lot of that. And it was less suggested. I'm not talking about like the sexuality that was apparent in like old Hammer films. I mean, because those were sexual, but it
mm,
was more like we're being sly and coy about it because we're British.
mm, mm,
We're just a little randy. But yeah,
mm.
Angie Everhart nailed it. I have not seen a vampire villain performance quite like that in ages. Prove me
Mm.
wrong.
And the only really, I mean, you have a point there because really the only film in between that really touches upon the sexuality is Scott's The Hunger,
Yeah. I
which
thought that
is
was in the
just
80s though. It
it
was prior to that.
was in the 80s. Yep,
Yep.
it was in the 80s. Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Yep.
with this, she just
As I say, as far as
it
like
was
between
super
Hammer
villain
and this,
vampire.
that's one of the few vampire films. But at the same time, you have people like Poppy Z Bright writing,
Mm.
and she took it to a whole other level.
And I mean, you get Corey Feldman, that one drifter guy who all he wants to talk about is vagina.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of feel like you're from Dusk Till Dawn, but there's just something that kicks a little bit more with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I digress. We went down a tangent. Voodoo
Yeah,
Zombies. And
that's
that kind
fun.
of brings us to the whole
Mhm,
plot of Zombie. And this is one of the things I wanted
mhm,
to ask you because, like, I've watched some of Fulci's other films and not just the ones that we talked about today. Off the top of my head, I can't name them.
mhm.
I want to say there was a couple slashers that he did. That
Like
granted,
New
yes,
York Ripper.
yes,
Mhm.
but
That's what probably is most. Yeah.
right. We don't call them slashers though. We call them giallo or whatever people want to call them. I
Mhm.
always screw up the
Well, New
enunciation.
York Ripper is a flat. It's just
Yeah.
flat out. It's not a giallo. It's a
So
slasher.
you see giallo. I've heard people say giallo. I've heard so many enunciations.
Giallo is technically plural.
Okay.
So I mean, it doesn't make a difference, but
And
yeah.
it's like, what really defines that? And let's be honest, Carpenter was ripping off the giallo anyways.
Well, well, yeah. It's kind of weird you mentioned Carpenter because
I love Carpenter, don't get
you
me
can
wrong.
look. Oh yeah, Carpenter. I love Carpenter, but the
Even Ghosts of
Zombie is
Mars.
a
I
film
love
like
Ghosts of Mars.
I like Ice T and or Ice Cube and anything. Pardon me. Um, but no. I mean, Halloween did much the same thing that Dawn of the Dead did,
Yes.
and actually Zombie did. I think that they have both influenced zombie film and what zombies are in contemporary culture equally and in different ways.
Right.
That's my personal.
And I
Yeah.
would say even like with this whole subgenre, it's even affected gaming, and a lot of people don't realize that because,
Well,
um,
Resident Evil.
well, no,
Yeah.
like Zombie itself, the ZOMBI, Ubisoft made a game
Hmm.
for PCs that was based on Dawn of the Dead ages ago. I want to
Hmm.
say it was like Amstrad and then Commodore. I
Hmm.
mean, we're not talking like on Nintendo, and a lot of it was foreign releases because it was under the title Zombie.
Hmm.
And since it was Ubisoft produced, they somehow held on to the rights to the title. And so when they made that game for the
Hmm.
Wii U, which eventually got ported over to PS4, it wasn't called Zombie U, it was just called Zombie. And I'm like, they're playing homage to
Hmm.
an older game. And again, it goes back into my whole thing of the zombie hole because
Hmm.
it shit gets weird with Day of the Dead and Zombie. Um,
Hmm.
and what I found interesting, because we kind of touched on Voodoo Zombies and of course Romero Zombies, um, because Romero Zombies, honestly, in the original Night of the Living Dead, there was no explanation. It only got added in later via that one radio transmission. I want to say it was what, a crash satellite or a meteorite or something that's
And
vaguely mentioned in the radio.
that's even very vague.
Yes,
That's like we're basically pulling our hair out trying to find some explanation.
right. And,
Um, yeah.
and that's what I think is interesting because this movie, Zombie, what was it, 1980?
Mm. The zombie flesh eaters,
Zombie,
1970,
Fulci Zombie.
Fulci, which was actually technically originally called Zombie Flesh Eaters,
Okay.
and it actually as it marketed later, that's when they threw zombie.
Okay. Or Zombie
It
2
was
on it.
technically during the Zombie Flesh Eaters time that Argento was still trying to get it. That's why they won, because literally it was like, who owns zombie? It's a
Yeah.
word. So
Well, it's like
mm,
Alien. Look at Alien 2 on Earth. On second thought, don't watch it. I've already watched it. But
I have seen it. I'm an Italian uh genre film completist, so yes, I've seen it.
so is this called spaghetti
It
splatter
blows.
then? I mean, we had spaghetti westerns, so why not spaghetti splatter?
Mhm. Yeah. Speaking of things like that, there was I forget who the director was. It was David Warbeck, I think, and it was called Alien from the Deep,
Hmm.
and it just I don't think it was it may have been a Lenzi.
Yeah.
I would look it up at the moment. I won't, but no, that's another one that was a blatant rip off of Alien.
But with Zombie, and I think it's very interesting
Mhm.
because like they try to give us an explanation, but they give us two completely different explanations. You got
Mhm.
forgive me, I didn't write down names because I don't do notes, but the doctor that's on the island is pure science.
Mhm.
Science, science, science.
Yeah.
We can find a cure and stop this. And the residents of the island where all this shit's happening, it's voodoo, it's black magic,
Mhm.
it's what have you. Um, and it kind of tripped me out because I'm sitting there like, okay, so voodoo's being practiced, but we were just in Mexico just a bit ago, or at least somewhere near Mexico or the Gulf of Mexico. And
Mhm.
now we're somewhere where there's Haitian. That's a hell of a boat ride. There's Haitian voodoo going on and things of that nature.
Mhm.
I'm like,
Mhm.
what's going on? What are the nationalities of these people, please? Because you'll hear bits of
Mhm.
Spanish and you'll also hear bits of Haitian, and
Mhm.
it's just interesting. It's a very
It
interesting
falls
fusion.
somewhere in that in between the Dominican Republic and Haiti.
Yeah, but there's no way that they went from the Gulf of Mexico and met up with that couple that quickly and wound up down there
Mhm.
to find this mysterious island nobody can find. They find it in like 5 seconds, but
Matul.
the
Yes.
tool, yeah.
The what was so the island of Matul, they actually only stumble upon it literally by mistake because they hire somebody to take them to Matul,
Mhm.
but they have no desire to. It is only when it becomes apparent that they have to go to the closest island that they enter Matul, and
Because of
all the
shark zombie
locals
action.
around it. Yeah, which is one of the great. I mean, this is a wonderful thing about Fucci. He had such an eye for set pieces, and it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but see, when they were making Zombie, it was actually this was Fulci's first full-fledged horror film, and Fulci wasn't the original person that they went to.
Mhm.
Fabrizio De Angelis, the first person they asked was Enzo Costarelli. And there were several other people before. I mean, basically, the script sat around for 5, 6 months, and he offered it to Fulci, and Fulci was like, "I've never done this before. Let's do it."
Right.
And while he was making it, he actually was making it in a kind of tongue-in-cheek manner. They were quite surprised by how many people were shocked by this film.
Mm.
That's they thought by going over the top, it would be more tongue-in-cheek, but no, it literally. I mean, they're okay. So if you look at the Romero Zombie has very distinct qualities.
And have
No,
rules.
Romero well, yeah, yeah, but so they're flesh eaters. So the flesh eating thing is definitely Romero, no question. Romero's zombies are also an allegory for just the human race in general,
Right.
but also consumerism
They're us, we're
and
them.
just every we are to see ourselves in his zombies, the good and the well, not the good, but basically the bad of us. The selfish end, the mind brainwashed end of us that just goes through life and does that. His zombies, I mean, I think honestly, I mean, don't get me wrong, Savini is amazing. I love
Yes.
Savini. And I think he did this really on purpose, is his zombies are very cartoonish, even more cartoonish than they were in Night of the Living Dead, which is virtually no makeup. Um, the zombies that Gianetto De Rossi created for zombie flesh eaters are they're gritty, they're of the earth, they're rotting, they're where Romero is talking a great deal in his films about zombies as allegories to life. Fulci's zombies are all about the horrors and disgusting element of death.
Yes.
And that's what makes it very different.
And I mean, I just thought it was interesting because there's a lot of good ideas, but and I hate to say this because I know Fulci's kind of revered. And it may be something that's lost in
Mhm.
translation. Maybe it was the cut I watched, but the movie seemed extremely short. But it seemed like it was working up some sort of
You said
ideas.
something about an hour.
Yeah, just over an hour.
It's a 93 minute film.
Yeah, it was. Well, I didn't sit through the credits, but I
Well,
mean,
I
it,
I mean, this is the funny thing. So, okay, so right there, you touched upon a wonderful thing that we're part of the generation that remembers this. So, in your VHSs in the United States, along with other countries, but the United States is really good at this one. You'd rename the film, and to get it out on VHS as soon as possible, you'd cut out the sex and the gore, and you'd also cut out large parts of plot.
oh, we
And you
still had
have
the eyeball
phenomena
scene.
being creepers. Well, you saw the eyeball scene, but the eyeball scene, but that it was a film. I mean, it's one of the classic video nasties. But like a lot of Italian films, along with the gore and such being taken out, large parts of plot. I mean, that's why, when, the uncut Argentos came out, they went from being, oh, wow, to wow.
Because like there's
It's
a
like,
scene where the doctor is removing blood from himself and he's looking at a microscope and I'm like, okay, what are you doing here? And then we're suddenly dealing with zombies showing up. I'm like, wait. Let's explain what you're doing here. Have some rando come in and explain why you're implementing your blood into this blood sample. Because I have watched the thing often enough to
mm,
know you need to pay attention to what's going on with that blood sample, And it's
did it at least have the information that Tia Farrow or Tisha Farrow's father was his assistant?
yes, because he was the one that was.
Okay,
Well,
good.
it
So
was
that's
his
that's
boat.
that's
I
a
don't know
key.
if he was supposed to be on the boat, but it was his. No, because he got shot in the head. That's right, and he got buried on the island.
Yeah. Well, he had sent communication, but ended up having to be killed.
Right, right.
So, mm,
And I thought that was kind of interesting because you kind of show what happens there, and like the zombie getting knocked off the boat in New York. It's got an interesting build
mm,
to it. The ending kind of seals up what happens in the beginning because we're so
mm,
focused on figuring out what happened to this girl's father and getting to the island and what the doctor's doing here, and is it voodoo, is it some sort of
mm,
science or disease. um but there it seems like there's a lot of it all tossed out at once at you. And I was
mm.
also still trying to understand, like, because the doctor's there and his wife, I'm assuming that's his wife, because that's the way it was treated, or at least the way I understood it.
The woman that is torn apart when Ian McCullough and Tisha Farrow and the gang take a jeep out to a house. That is his wife.
Right. So I'm trying to
Mm,
understand why she had this major breakdown. I mean, she knew that the dead was already there, but she seemed like she was in a relatively safe spot until we find out later she's not. Um,
mhm,
but the thing of it is that she already knows that this is going on. She knows he's a doctor. He's studying something and something
mm,
screwed up. But for her to get to the point where she already hates his guts, and if they weren't stuck on an island,
mhm.
that there's a divorce hearing coming up very soon.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and
Mm.
it's like, where did all of this come from? I mean, was there some sort of extramarital affair going on? Was she sleeping with one
No,
of
I think it was more the fact that she knew that it was getting out of control.
Oh, okay.
That he had become obsessive about trying to find some cure
Because we're
because
just given
here's
like a
another one.
taste. We're not given like
Mhm,
5 months later, and we're not seeing them as a happy couple
mhm.
and then 5 months later, because that to
Well,
me would give it a little bit more of a punch, you know?
Well, I
We're
mean,
cool now.
his
5 months
wife,
later, not so much.
I mean, his wife in the film really is only there to propel the action that eventually happens at the
To get her
house.
eyeball ripped out,
So
or
yeah,
not ripped out, but the
yeah,
piece of
to
wood jammed
get,
through
and
it.
then
Yeah.
that whole, and then the whole scene in which you're introduced to um the first, full-fledged Fulci gut uh crunching scene.
Hmm.
um so now it's interesting because we talked about the zombie cycle, and we're going to touch upon that. But Zombie was actually not written in any way by Fulci. Usually, Fulci, if he took a film, had some credit in the screenplay.
Right.
Donald Scanetti was one of the main writers. It it had been kicked around for a long time. Um, it there's something about, okay, so Fulci in himself, he was very transgressive in all the genres that he tried. And that's what makes Fulci so special in the Italian
Mm.
director's field. That it's always been so easy to look at his films as grotesque or things like that, but his gialli are insanely transgressive. Lizard in a woman's skin is not your typical gialli. Don't torture a duckling is by no means your traditional gialli. Um, so it only makes sense that he's going to take the zombie in a very different direction.
As one
And that's what
should.
you see when that's when he finally gets to, when you get to the trilogy, the Gothic trilogy. A lot of people like to put Zombie into a quadrology, and that's fine and dandy, but it's Zombie in itself is
Thematically, it doesn't
basically a
fit.
warm up.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
it
fit.
doesn't. It's a warm up for what he and Scardenti wanted to do eventually, which is by far more atmosphere based. It is, and Dardano Scardetti will be the first person to say, yeah, I approach these, and Lucio and I approach these as being Lovecraft oriented. They're very different, but I find the first film, the Zombie Flesh Eaters, I find it very entertaining. I mean, it's got, for, I mean, a lot of Italian cinema, and especially Fulci. Fulci, I mean, I remember before Fulci was really given the element of love that he deserves. One of Fulci's, he loved Benoit. So Fulci, given the chance, wanted to play with surrealism.
Mm.
And, Zombie is one of his most straightforward films as far as narrative, but still with that, there's always kind of a dream-like quality
Right.
to his work.
And the thing, it just like the whole explanation stuff just kind of set me off. And then, like,
Mm-hmm.
for me, you've got several different types of zombies running around. See, and me, I'm always one who needs rules because when it was first like
Mm-hmm.
the newly dead and then freshly reanimated, I was like, okay, now we
Mm-hmm.
can kind of dip more into the science and maybe a touch of the voodoo, but it would lean more
Mm-hmm.
toward the science. But then you get to the graves, the ones that have been buried for quite a while, because they find like a conquistador helmet, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
this graveyard full of old dead things are being reanimated,
Mm-hmm.
which not possible even in a scientific manner. It'd have to be black magic, but it never gave us a definitive answer one way or the other. It just, and to me, it's like I don't want an explanation because let's be honest, if we were going through a zombie apocalypse, I don't think you or I are going to sit down and try to figure out exactly what's going on. We're going to be too wired for survival. But
You said the magic word, apocalypse.
yes,
You can, this is also something that is, part of the Romero films. And if you, I mean, so Zombie Flesh Eaters, is how it's, as far as the beginning, the iconic fat zombie, as we'll call him. It's a film about the apocalypse, and it's a film about a obsessed doctor that refuses to give in to what is the apocalypse. um and that, that's why I think it's so amazing. And it's interesting because I think it moves well into his other films. Now there are films in the zombie cycle, like Nightmare City, by Umberto Lenzi. That's a chemical virus film. Was it Revenge of the Living Dead? That was Bruno Manetti's. That is a chemical and a rat. So, there are films that do give some kind of, but in my opinion, the best ones are ones that are mysterious.
Right.
Fulci's, so there is actually a history of zombies in Italian cinema that is much more prevalent than cinema in other countries. So Mario Bava used zombies in several of his films, but they tended to be the fantasy ones, like the peplums, like Hercules and the Haunted World, and then you had Planet of the Vampires.
Right.
But then you also had films, roughly around 72, you had Armando Ozario's Tomb of the Blind Dead, which is another
Now, those are some
mysticism thing
films I
with the
want to get
Templar
into
Knights.
with you at some point for
Oh,
another
they're
time.
phenomenal. They're phenomenal. But then I also have to touch upon a film that came out around that same time that I think Fulci pulls more from than he does anything by Romero, and that's Jorge Grau's Living Dead of Manchester Morgue, otherwise known as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie.
Okay.
That's amazing, and the explanation is so amazing in it, because there's a new piece of farm equipment that kills insects.
I've seen that
With particular sound
pesticide.
wave.
Yeah. Sound
Yes,
wave.
it's not even
Yeah.
pesticide; it's a sound wave,
Yeah. Sound.
and the
It
sound wave
reanimates the
brings
dead.
the dead back.
I remember.
And
I've seen that one.
it's an amazing film. I mean,
It's
Jorge
out
Grau
there,
is an
but
amazing
yeah.
director. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I just
So,
liked it because it did leave a lot of things up in the air. But for me, I mean, out of the four I watched, it's definitely one of my favorites. Simply because of that
mm,
ending shot. That ending shot is my
mm.
favorite. Like they're shuffling across. What is that supposed to be? Brooklyn Bridge?
Yeah, it's Brooklyn Bridge. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But they're shuffling across
Quick little
Brooklyn
story
Bridge.
on
You
that.
got regular traffic going,
Yeah.
which is kind of
Quick
cool.
little story on that, because it was okay. So it was the producer Angelus, and actually it might have been Michelle Soavi, one of the assistant directors, did it. But literally, it basically was a van or two vans full of about 40 people that De Rossi did quick makeup jobs on.
Mhm.
They jump out, they get set up, and it's totally without a permit. That's another thing about this movie. All the New York scenes, not
Without a
one
permit.
permit.
I can imagine because even
No
one of my
permit.
favorites, Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
like 90% of the shots they took was all guerrilla filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, a lot of Italian productions were doing that, and Spanish productions, but it's definitely
At
taking one from the
least they
Larry
didn't
Cohen playbook.
shoot some Italian city for New York. We gotta give them credit where credit's due.
Mm.
This isn't
Well,
Jason Takes
speaking of credit where
Manhattan,
credit's
or should we
due,
say Toronto?
oh, good God. Yeah. He visits Manhattan after a very boring time at sea. But
Visits
Zombie is also
Toronto.
important in the fact that, so zombie flesh eaters and the City of the Living Dead specifically, kind of started a trope. It had been done in the cannibal cycle too, which is prior, but it really took off was the fact that basically almost all of your Italian horror movies were starting in New York. Like, I mean, even every like Black Emanuel movie basically starts in New York City.
Well, you have to understand, like around that time, that's when they were handing out that wacky ass flyer with like the skull and crossbones on it about how this is the city of death.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like saying, "Damn, I'm old." How wasn't that in history books?
Well, speaking, what's that?
Wasn't that flyer in history books even when we went to school? It had to have
I
been.
think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
This is the city of death. Don't stay out
Well,
past 8 o'clock.
well, let's talk a bit about the Gates of Hell trilogy,
Yes.
and that of course starts out with a bang, which
Yes.
is City of the Living Dead,
Starts
also
with a
known as
bang,
Gates
goes
of
out with a
Hell.
whimper.
Hey, well, I have a lot of love for House by the Cemetery, but there are things. It's funny, they're bookend by two very different Bobs.
Yes.
You have the Bob of
Yes.
Gates of Hell, and you have the Bob of
The Bob
City
that
of the
should have
Living
just been
Dead,
called
and
Kenny.
yeah, the Bob that there's part of you, no matter how wonderfully suspenseful it's filmed, you kind of want Freudstein to kill a little shit.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think I even messaged you. I think now we know
Which
that Bob
basically,
is Italian
I'll
for
give a
Kenny.
spoiler. He does. I mean,
Kinda,
sorry
like
guys, but
gray area.
if there's any ambiguity to the ending of House by the Cemetery, Bob's dead. Little guy does not make it out.
But it's not a violent death, so we
So,
don't get to see it. We don't get to enjoy it. He gets adopted by a ghost family. Spoilers.
he gets by the daughter and wife of Dr. Freudstein.
Yes. And to me, it's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's always been Dr. Freudstein's house.
Don't call it the Freudstein house. But
Yes.
okay, well, let's talk about City of the
Yes, City
Living
of the
Dead
Dead.
or Gates of
And since
Hell.
we started with Bob,
So, yeah.
Bob,
So,
his blow up
I mean,
doll, the
right
dead
off the bat.
fetus.
Oh, good God. Yes. There's no law. So, one of the
That was a
wonderful
dead
things
fetus,
about
right? There was just
the
way too
trilogy.
many maggots and everything
Well,
else
yes.
to go.
Yeah.
Fetus?
Yes. It was supposed to be a dead fetus. It's over the top, to say the least. But okay,
Because
so
the maggot
these
scene
films are
wasn't.
not supposed to make sense. Fucci's goal was atmosphere. So, to say that they are confusing, that's what they are. They get progressively, well, not really. The Beyond is the most confusing of the films, but it starts out very much with the Gothic. I mean,
Yes,
you
you get the
have the priest and
tombstone
the
and
priest, this tombstone that says, this is the town of Dunwich, H.P. Lovecraft. Um, Also, you get the reference to the Twilight Realm.
the original
Um,
Salem.
the book of yeah, there's this weird, interesting element there. You have the Book of Enoch in City of the Living Dead, but the Book of Ebon in the second film. There's so many ways you can connect them, but City of the Living Dead, I think, is paced the best. I think that it has the best camaraderie between the actors, and it also features effects by De Rossi that are mind-boggling. That to this day, I some of those I have never been topped. I mean,
The
the
ending,
idea.
the only
Okay, so
complaint I have is that ending. Because I could tell it felt like it was tacked on for scares. And it's like you could tell it's supposed to be a
um,
happy ending, but it's not.
it was a necessity in the editing room
Ah.
because I don't remember what the original ending was supposed to be, but Fulci and everybody, when they got to it and were ready to film, were like, no, we don't like this. So basically, in the editing room, they said, we'll figure something out. And that's where that ending comes.
At least they didn't
But I
pull
kind of like it.
like that one Italian director did, and I can't think of which movie it is. The nightmare is now reality.
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to remember which one that is, too.
Yes, that could have easily fit into that end. The nightmare is now reality.
Uh, well, I mean, you know, I hate to say too bad of things about the ending because it does thematically connect. There's in the trilogy, there's this definite connection with children. Children are very prevalent in the films, and I would also put the adult Bob in the place of a child because his maturity
What
level
was the deal
and
with
honestly his
Bob
innocence
though? I
of
mean,
child.
not the whole odd sexuality thing, but like all the
Mhm.
teenage girls, or at least girls in their 20s, were still kind of hot and bothered by Bob.
Well, I think it was less hot and bothered by Bob than honestly the younger girls felt comfortable around him. I mean, there was an element to his shyness and his. But it's funny because the town wants to blame everything on Bob because Bob, even if he would have done something with
He was an outsider, an
the young
outcast.
lady,
Yeah.
he was the outside of the outcast. He never actually did anything bad,
Because like
but
before he even got drilled,
he,
it was the girl who was like, "Oh, let's smoke this pot," and like I'm just like,
yeah,
"Wait,
yeah,
Bob, you got it going on.
he's
Why do you have the blow up doll? What's going on here, buddy?"
mhm. Which I think that is yet again supposed to be a reference to his innocence and his he's an outsider. He's kind of dirty, maybe looks a little creepy,
And
but
I'm
he honestly
sorry,
is just he's
you and
kind
I
of
both know
special.
for a fact a blow up doll does not blow up like that. An escape raft,
No, no,
yes. If you need a raft
no.
and your boat is sinking and you're out in the middle of the ocean, yes, that thing will inflate in 30 seconds or less. So anybody out
Mm.
there watching want to make a blow up doll that can inflate in 30 seconds or less, you're going to be a multimillionaire somewhere.
Well, also Bob didn't have any access to a motorized pumping instrument that might be able to do it.
Yes.
Uh,
He
so
just threw it on the ground like you would an
no,
emergency raft,
yeah,
though.
it is a strange scene because yeah.
I'm like, the supernatural's already starting here. And then, dead baby.
Mhm.
It's an extreme. And, like the movie opens with the
Mhm.
hanging, because essentially that's what I take is going on. 'Cause you see all the tombstones keep cutting to the
Mhm.
evil priest. And then we jump to the psychics. And that was interesting because I
Mhm.
mean, I would love to read those police reports from those two guys, especially after the dead girl comes back to life. I mean, can you just see the day that they're having with paperwork? What do you mean she's not dead?
Oh my god. Okay, so this is what bothered me as far as things in the film. So okay, so Katarina McCall, who is in all three of the zombie the gothic trilogy,
Right.
she is assumed dead. She's buried alive, but
Not even
within what seems to
involved.
be like well, okay, so there's an explanation to that one.
Okay.
If you see the table, it's a reference to the fact that there's some element of Judaism
Okay.
connected to. So it whether that was just something they stumbled upon or whatever, but that explains that to an extent. The problem for me is why in a half hour after that is she flirting with Christopher George?
Oh, why was the guy in the
He
first
seems
movie
way
getting
too happy for a
action
person who's been
underneath a ruse?
back.
I mean, his bald and his
Yeah.
age was clearly showing in Zombie, if you recall. The reporter,
Oh well.
and he's like, "Yeah, we got to make out now."
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. If you want to get into that, we can, because you mentioned Christopher George, who is a horror icon that reluctantly became one. I mean, of course, he was in many of William Girdler's films, which he probably is best known for in the United States. Um, but okay, so I'm sure you've heard the stories about Lucio Fulci being a asshole, a misogynist, a
You
sadist,
hear that
all
about
these
so
horrible
many
things.
directors. I've stopped even listening to it until there's actual
Mhm.
evidence and reports and action against them. Because you hear it all the time. I mean, look at Kubrick, for example. Oh, he was intense. Oh, he was terrible. Maybe the actors were a bunch of pussies. I don't know.
Well, in Fulci's take, maybe it's not the best thing for a director, but Lucio Fulci, I mean, he had been making movies for a very, very long time. He made an amazingly large number of comedies. He made musicals. Um, so he came from a very professional background. He's also a very technically, well trained director.
Right.
But you heard all these stories, then you started, like, the people that he was constantly working with, or people who were known to be consummate professionals. He loved them and they loved him. If you weren't professional, if you weren't willing to do what you signed on to do,
Yeah, you
or
shit.
you in any way were a diva of any kind, he hated you and he was going to make your life hell. He wanted complete professionalism from everybody. And, people like Fabrizi and De Rossi and Dodano Scadetti and De Angelis, Caterina McCall, Ian McCullough, who's in Zombie, all have lovely things to say about him. And over the years, people who have known people who worked with him have nothing but great things to say about him. Now, back to Christopher George. Christopher George shows up for City of the Living Dead, not taking it seriously at all, knowing that he's like, I'm just, I'm bottom of the barreling it. Um, yeah, which actually works in the film because him being cocky and everything
Right.
works, but he and Christopher George hated each other. That was actually on the set. The only, like, issue that Fulci had with anybody. But it would get out of hand. Now, there's a famous scene in City of the Living Dead or Gates of Hell, the maggot scene.
Hmm.
Um, they're real maggots.
Oh yeah.
The only thing that Katerina Hall, what
Oh yeah. I you could
was that?
tell. You could tell.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The only thing Katerina McCall had an issue with, but she did it. But this is the kind of person Christopher George was. So, uh, Fulci was a big time pipe smoker. He
Right.
smoked his pipe all the time. He was even known for smoking it upside down because he was so, kind of ADHD ish.
Hmm.
Um, so after that scene, um, he sneaked over with the help of one of the camera techs and took a handful of maggots and put them into Fulci's pouch
Hmm.
of tobacco,
Oh geez.
which of course led to him. Yeah. Now, after that, the relationship was done.
Yeah,
But
obviously.
that's that. Christopher George, in certain ways, is kind of a big kid.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean that one I will say out of the three, because like you said, I don't really include Zombie as part of that. I don't know why it gets lumped in with them.
mm,
But that film in and of itself, I thought was basically superior out of all the other ones that were there. In fact, honestly, the
oh yeah,
order in
it's a
which they
very,
were
very tight film.
released was each one was like that. The first film was the best one, City of the Dead. Then you had the secondary one, The Beyond. That was pretty good, but I wasn't buying a lot
I
of
still,
it.
I put them both together. I think those are my two favorite. I hate to say favorite. Um, my two Fulci films I find myself revisiting the most.
I could tell what they were trying to
Because
do with The
Beyond is
Beyond.
really not supposed to have.
Yeah.
Well, the Beyond is set in, that Faulknerian kind of South and that Southern Gothic,
Yes.
and it is not supposed to make sense.
Oh, and it's
It is
trippy. Yeah, it's
supposed to
fun.
be like a dream. Yeah, it's very trippy. And it explains. Now it was even released in the United States as a cut version as Seven Doors to Hell,
Right.
and that goes back to the Book of Ebon and the Seven Doors of Death, or of Hell, which technically you can tie those three films to it, because the House of Freudstein, it's never really explained how he was able to, as a doctor, he didn't figure out how to, live his life rotting away, needing human corpses to stay kind of functional. It has to have some mystical element to it. So
Yeah.
they all bind together. But I think, visually, I think that The Beyond is stunning. Um, David Warbeck is not as exciting, or, the relationship between him and Katerina McCall versus Christopher George and Katerina McCall, which bizarrely at times, like I pointed out, but there's this
Mhm.
flirtiness that helps lighten a very dreary film. So you know so there's really no light element to the Beyond. It
Yeah,
just goes.
The Beyond, I will say it, and it's gonna sound strange, but like it almost kind of reminds me of Midsummer Night's Dream a little bit. Just a little bit.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
kind of. It does have that air of a dream, where things are very surreal. It did have a great setup, I will say that, like plot wise, because for me, it's all
Mm-hmm.
about story. You could make a shit movie, but if you had a story there, I'm invested. And basically, inheriting a whole entire hotel that's got some shaky history in and of itself is a plot, you know. And then of course you got the dude that
Mm-hmm.
was in there back in what was it, the 40s or the 20s? I say,
It was the 20s, I think.
yeah. And then he
Or
gets
was it?
taken down to
I
the
think it was
basement and nailed to the
the
wall.
artist. Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
because
And
apparently he
a
was demonic.
assumedly acidic
Yeah,
thing is thrown on him,
right.
some acidic fluid.
And it was waking up some sort of seal of hell or gate of hell as well. And the ending is kind of reflective of the painting. So I mean, it all comes back into
Mhm. Yeah.
together.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
just
it is a tight film, but is a dream film.
yes,
I think the only thing that really bothers me is Joe. Joe just randomly shows up places. It's like, this happens to Joe, the plumber, and then next thing you know, we're in Joe getting embalmed and Joe having his wife put clothing on for his funeral, and that stuff is all kind of
no, and
okay. It doesn't fit, but
with
it's
the daughter
okay because
going
it's
blind,
all about tone.
with the daughter going
Mm-hmm.
blind, was that supposed to some way kind of connect to the other blind chick in the movie as well? I mean, because it kind of felt like they were kind of
Oh,
leading to that, but then what happens with that little girl toward like the climax kind of alleviates that, but it felt like there could have been threads hinting at the other blind woman trying to kind of give future past advice, if that makes sense.
well, the blind woman. I'm sorry, I cannot remember her name. The actress. But it's it's really fascinating because Katarina McCall's character in The Beyond is literally living an entire life that is fantasy, or somehow it's, transmuted onto her by this dead woman,
Yeah.
because the blind girl is just trying to do everything she can so she doesn't have to return to the side in which they walk to in the end, and they come out blind, so they officially enter the beyond.
Right, but you know how the little girl goes blind from like during that whole acid incident, and it's kind of shown toward the end of the film, if you recall.
Yeah.
And
uh
to me, my brain was kind
yeah.
of like making a mental connection because you had the one witch at the beginning of the movie. It was kind of relaying the tale, and it wasn't. I mean, she seemed like she was
Mm-hmm.
blind, and it seemed like it was the same chick later on in the movie. And to me, when you're dealing with supernatural stuff, you can deal with time slips and time jumps and things of that nature. It just kind of felt like
Mm-hmm.
we're watching the progression of this character, but out of order. Here's how the little girl got blinded.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the little girl now in the 40s, and then here she is trying to help out during the situation while she was still a little girl. And to me, I'm like, that
Mm-hmm.
could have been its own separate, really twisted, interesting story because that's why that house is
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
empty and is abandoned
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't quite exist yet. It was weird.
Well,
And
the whole inclusion of Plumber Joe's family is kind of problematic, as far as you have no reason to care about these people at all, and some of the main action in the center of the film happens to them.
right. And
Yeah.
to me it's just, yeah, it definitely was out there, and it was one of those movies where I literally had to sit down and watch it again, not
Mm-hmm.
because it was good. I mean, granted, the first one I
Mm-hmm.
love City of the Dead or City of the Living Dead. But I had to watch it again just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Because every time I watched it, I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I was missing something. I'm like, I've already watched this twice. I'm not watching it a third time. So I even had the second watching
Mm-hmm.
the rewind button close by so I could wait. What did they just say? And I don't know if it's yeah, it just feels a lot of these stories have something missing to it. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of adds to the enigma and everything else. They're shot beautifully. They're done well, except for this last one. We'll talk about that here in a second. But it just feels like there's something missing. Like Zombie had its own missing bits. City of the Living Dead had that very off-putting ending. I'm like, just make it be the happy ending, or just cut the end where they get out of the well and leave it ambiguous, saying, hey, was it All Saints Day or whatever day it was, had already passed and they failed anyway, so the dead come rising up, and just cut it there.
They're
That would,
now November 1st.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been a better ending. Um, but this one just there was something here, and I'd watch it again, but just to see what I missed. And it is shot beautifully, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like a lot of the Cajun accents I just didn't feel were on the nose. I was like, they were trying way too hard.
So,
So
well, let's go into the world of Dr. Freudstein.
it's the Freudstein house. It's
House by
always
the
been the
Cemetery.
Freudstein house.
Freudstein.
It's
So,
always been the
so well,
Freudstein house. That
I
line's gonna
like
stick
the
with me.
film. It's not one of my all-time favorites, but it it only in certain ways thematically truly connects to the Gothic trilogy. It is part of it there because there are so many still Lovecraftian elements
And
to
even the
it,
story
and
itself
there
is
is a
Lovecraftian
New England, yeah, there's a New England contemporary
because
gothicness
it's
to
Boston.
this old house. Yeah, so you have the old house trope, but it's actually in some ways more a proto slasher film.
Yes. And that's what I felt
Yeah.
too.
So
But
it
we only
makes a
got what?
thematic shift
The
that
babysitter kill, and then the family.
uh-huh.
And that's it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Aside
Well,
from
also the
Freudstein's
realtor gets
previous family.
the realtor gets it.
Oh, the real, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. She
So
did.
you have the realtor, the babysitter, uh, the family itself, and I swear there's another kill in there. I apologize, I can't remember, but there's another kill and I forget. Oh, okay, duh. Okay, so it's weird because it's never really explained, but the two people at the beginning of the film,
Mm.
which is another thing about these films I think is very special, is they don't rely on sex. In Italian and Spanish co-productions and individual productions, almost always wanted to mix sex with horror. Now, City of the Living Dead, no, but I'm sorry, that House by the Cemetery, it's getting late, has a bit of a sex scene in
Mm.
the beginning that leads to two very violent killings by Dr. Freudstein. The first couple times I watched the film, I somehow thought they were connected to the professor who kills himself. But
Mm.
no, these are just two random people that are getting it on in this house. There's no explanation for that, in my knowledge. I
Yeah.
might be wrong, but I've never been able to pick it up because the professor that finds out about Freudstein doing his research kills himself in the library.
Mm.
So, yeah, so you have to put in those kills too. And that's always like, let's just give two more random kills. Let's start this movie like we've done with the other ones with a bang.
Yeah. But it's just the whole delivery of it, because like you watch the first two films and you're like, wow, there's definitely something unique about both of them. And I hate to kind of pigeonhole it like this, but you get the mad scientist trope in the end of this, who's just killing
Get the
people,
mad
just
scientist stroke.
yeah, killing people to
Well, yeah,
sustain his
it
life.
also it feels the most contemporary
Yeah.
of the Gothic trilogy. So it, definitely, is the most that is centered in, you know, academia wanting to find real reasons for why these things happen. And, I find the young man, I forget his name, I apologize, I don't have it, but that played Bob, there's the voiceover on that is just
Yeah.
yeah, you just want to strangle the
I
fucker,
don't think it
to
would have
be
been better with
honest.
the original voice either. I think it just would have still been annoying.
No, 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 yeah, it was, but it also, is, I think that House by the Cemetery has some of the most suspenseful scenes that Fulci has ever filmed. I mean, he successfully makes this trope of the door, and
Mm.
again referencing the
The
seven
game.
doors of death. Um, he uses this continual trope, but is able to keep it that this it's very suspenseful. I mean, yeah, I mean, it is. It's a movie that makes you jump more than the other films. Um, the other films are just they're basically watching like an hour and a half of dread.
Yeah, and the other films, at least to some degree, it kind of had kind of like an apocalyptic feel to them. Even the
Mhm.
Beyond to some degree, because now we're in this weird post-apocalyptic world full of dead bodies and like this gray sea, well, gray
Mhm.
fog, and everybody's blind, and they were talking about a gate of hell opening up, which of course is going to cause all kinds of problems in the world. But this one, yeah, just
Mhm.
a mad scientist in the basement pops out, kills people on occasion. Don't go to that house. It's
Mhm.
It's not like
And
Dr.
the Freudstein
Freudstein.
family through spirit populates the house.
Yes.
So it is this proto slasher that has a by far more like, old dark house with ghost and a mad scientist. So that they're of the movies, it's the one that I think tips the hat to the classic horror film.
Yeah. So if you want to watch a better take on the old scientist and the haunted house, just watch the Asphyx. Way better.
No, that is yeah. As a oh, I still stand by it as being a great Fulci film. Now we've talked a lot about. I just want to say that Fulci, you know the films that came from that cycle are much of the time considered his voice,
Right.
at his best. But I definitely recommend checking out, what he was doing with the Gialli. Lizard in a Woman's Skin is very trippy. It's very psychedelic. Um, Don't Torture a Duckling, very critical of the Catholic Church, which where Fulci wasn't necessarily political, he had some major issues with the church.
Right.
Um, uh,
You could kind of tell
the
with some of the
psychic,
religious overtones in some of these films too. It was there.
yeah, the psychic is a very fascinating take on the Gialli,
Okay.
because yet again, it has a mysticism quality to it. And as far as other, I can't get my head around Manhattan Baby. I've tried so hard, and there's just something about it I just can't bring myself to. But I mean, if you can try to check out this wonderful his basically taking horror. This is something Fuji did beautifully. He loved to mix things. And so for the Apocalypse is this beautiful mix of horror and gritty Western. Um, that's a high point. Um, Cat in the Brain. I have to say, Cat in the Brain
I have that one.
is not a great film,
Hmm.
but it's probably his last quality film. And for somebody who you got to give it. I mean, this is a meta film in which there's been very few meta films made, and whether or not you think of it, it's amazing to think that Lucio Fulci can like actually star in a film about himself, and he actually does a good job. I mean, is the final product, that's arguable, but there are certain elements to it that are very original.
Right. Yeah.
So
And I
I
mean, like,
recommend that.
Fulci, when it comes down to it, like, because the thing I really want to look into is the whole zombie cycle, as you and I
Mm,
have discussed, because it kind of devolves from Fulci's, zombie flesh eaters, into Zombie 3 Afterlife. Can't think of what Zombie
mm.
4 is, and I want to say Zombie 5 is something about birds.
Zombie 4 is just Zombie 4. And then
Okay.
Zombie 5 is Killer Birds, which I think probably was just some random film. And they were like, oh, we'll just toss zombie on it.
Right. And it just
It's
kind
not
of
that.
devolves, but when you go to other countries, some of these sequels, quote unquote, are taken
Mhm.
out and other movies are substituted in, and sometimes the
Yes.
series continued on, which is
Hmm.
kind of interesting. Uh,
Like Demons and Demons 3.
yes,
Mhm.
it's kind of like
The ogre film. Yeah.
it's kind of like with Evil Dead. It had a bunch of sequels over in certain countries too. It was called La Casa,
Mhm.
and it was kind of lumped in with the
Yeah.
House series. And
Hmm.
yeah, you get all of these unrelated
Lenzi did
movies,
one, didn't he?
huh?
I think Umberto Lenzi did one of those.
Yes,
In fact, I
yes,
know he did. Yep.
and
Good
it
old
was just
Umberto
interesting.
Lenzi. To talk about a pompous human
Yeah. Oh, trust me,
Umberto Lenzi took credit for everything.
And Umberto Lenzi would sometimes like make movies where he would give himself a fake name, but then later credit himself in the movie. And I'm like, why'd you give yourself a fake name, bud?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was. Well, I mean, let's touch upon quickly his contribution to the zombie cycle. Nightmare City,
Okay.
which is one of his better films. It is, one can say there is definite references to Romero's Crazies, but you know, unlike Umberto Lenzi saying, he created the cannibal film or whatever, it's a huge influence on what eventually became the 28 Days Later films.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the running zombie was an Umberto Lenzi. So, I mean, I will give him due where he deserves due. The running zombie was not a 28 Days Later thing. That was Lenzi.
Yeah. And I will say 28 Days Later, the second one, which was what, 28 weeks later?
28 weeks later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sadly, we didn't get months. We're close to getting years.
Yeah, if it ever does happen.
But like
But
I
a
will
couple
say the
other ones.
second one was a great sequel. It's got some interesting
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
pacing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it wasn't an American production, so this is why.
Yeah, and also had one of the great directors is functioning today.
Yes.
Um, but some other ones that are worth checking out in the Italian zombie cycle. One of my personal favorites is by a true sleaze merchant, Andre Biaggi,
Okay.
who's also known for his giallo called Strip Nude for Your Killer, and one of my personal favorite transgressive pieces of junk, Malabimba.
Okay.
So that Burial Ground is this bizarrely beautiful film that really has no logic at all, but also features one of the weirdest mother son necrophilia dynamics in any film. So I do recommend that if you want over the top. Um, as far as other films, I want to bring up a film that was released as Zombie Holocaust, but then re-edited and released in the United States called Dr. Butcher MD.
Okay.
This was made about 6 months after Zombie. And from kind of what I got is they kind of knew pretty soon as things were going on is this was going to be hot. And as soon as it was released, it went gangbusters and it was sold internationally great. So zombie holocaust is the idea of like, well, if we mix cannibals and zombies, but hey, let's get basically the exact same cast from Zombie and also use all the same freaking sets.
Oh, geez.
And these sets were location. So they're fun films to watch together because it's like this weird, messed up sequel because you have like so many actors returning, actors basically playing the same character. The hospital is the same. It's just it yeah. It's not a good film, and the Dr. Butcher MD cut is even more absurd. But the zombie, really came into its own. And I think the contemporary zombie, owes more to Lucio Fulci than Romero.
Yeah.
Like The Walking Dead and things like that. Uh, Fulci's zombies are not political. They are, they're supposed to show the horrors and disgustingness and of death and the how the earth just takes you back. And I think in certain ways that and especially the makeup of De Rossi has had a huge influence. Romero's still do, but
Mm-hmm.
there are fewer and fewer films that approach the zombie in a truly social confine, like Romero did. You have more things like The Walking Dead and stuff like that. That
I think my favorite all-time zombie movies, and I'm gonna phrase them like this, involve German soldiers, because we're gonna be on YouTube.
Oh, Shockwaves.
Yes, I love Shockwaves. I love the more recent Frankenstein's Army.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen Frankenstein's Army yet or not, but it's worth
Yes,
watching.
it's a very good. That came out a
And
couple years ago. It's phenomenal.
I also love the Red Snow duology. I'm hoping for a
Okay.
trilogy, but I
So
don't know where else they can go with
if you're
that.
into Nazi zombies, what are your feelings about Zombie Lake?
Oh, I hate that movie. I tried to get through it.
Okay, now don't get it confused with Oasis of the Zombies.
Okay, well, this one had a lot of
Okay,
tits
so
in it. Not that it's
that
necessarily a bad thing.
well, I think that was probably did it did it make no sense at all?
Yes, made no sense
And
at all, but there
it
seemed to also be like a German soldier relationship that had an offspring, and
yes,
it kind of became
there were
incestuous.
Nazi things.
Yes.
It was set in like a oasis, literally.
Okay.
Okay, so you have the Jesus Franco one, which is Oasis of the Zombies, which is utterly dreadful.
Okay. Then I watched
But
the wrong
Zombie
one.
Lake is a genre. The Zombie Lake is a genre in, and it is actually quite good. Is it one of his best films? No, but it, unlike the Franco film, there is a story and there is pacing and there is logic
But I would say,
for
like,
Jean Rollin.
out of the ones that we just talked about, like, we both strongly agree on Shockwaves because it's
Yeah.
not your traditional zombie recipe. And you've got some heavy
Mm-hmm.
hitters in there. You've got Peter Cushing, you've got
Yep.
Carradine. I mean, it's stacked. It's a stacked deck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think I enjoy it, because like the first time I watched it, I'm like, oh, this sounds like it would be a zombie movie, but the way it's kind of advertised, it's not. And then I get watching it, and I'm like, wait, is that Carradine? Wait, is that Cushing? I'm like, I'm invested. But yeah, like for me, those have been my big draws when it comes to zombie movies of late. I'm not a big Call of Duty person, so it has nothing to do with that. It's just an interesting concept, because they did odd science experiments back then, so it kind of lends to itself hand in hand. And Dead Snow desperately wants to be Evil
Dead
Dead.
Snow is phenomenal.
Yeah,
Well,
it is.
that falls under the whole. So, I mean, there even reference. Okay, so when Brain Dead or Dead Alive happened, it redid the zombie trope again.
Yes.
The zombie trope now became zombies, and this is actually funny because it actually brought the social satire back to zombies. So you had Brain Dead or Dead Alive, and then you had all these weird zombie comedies, like the Australian film The Undead. um there were just zombies became something of a joke.
Right. And
They're
like
very good films, but
it's over the top and it's fun. And if you want to watch something that's
mm-hmm,
just silly, those are the ones to watch. But like when it comes to serious like zombie genre films, like I would have to say
mm-hmm,
Shockwaves, and then after that, I would stick with the classic Romero trilogy. I don't acknowledge
mm-hmm,
Land, even though it's a nice little Salvini machete zombie reference showing back up.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and then of course, like the later sequels. What did you have? You had Diary of the Dead, even though it was supposed to be its own
Diary of the Dead.
um Island of
Well,
the Dead.
isn't Twilight finally going to happen?
Yeah, but I don't know how I feel about that, because that's not going to be directed by Romero. I mean, obviously, dear God,
Mm-hmm,
but I would just say leave it be, because at that point when it
mm-hmm.
was written and everything else, he was kicking out like direct to video scripts, and I just don't know how I feel about it. It's kind of like later Carpenter. I love later Carpenter films, like when we get to, like I said, Ghost of Mars, and there was another one he did that I really, really enjoyed from around that era that a lot of people
Body
don't.
bags?
Huh?
Body bags?
No, no, that was 90s.
Mhm.
Um,
That was nice. Mhm.
yeah, this was something that would have been like 2000s. I want to say it was direct to video, but it was decent and involved an asylum,
Mhm.
and it was really good for a
Okay.
Carpenter film and on a lower budget.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, it just seems like you get lesser quality after a while. And at the end of the day, I think the only reason I love Ghost of Mars was that it was supposed to be another sequel to Escape from. It was going to be Escape from Earth this time. But obviously, Escape from LA didn't pan out. So we didn't.
The surfing scene, I just,
Yeah,
oh man.
yeah.
And then the bat, yeah, I just, yeah.
The
And
most memorable
that was,
thing is Bruce
in
Campbell as a plastic
retrospect, it's a
surgeon.
fun movie to visit, but it just is not, it just was not,
I've got no problem watching
it was a bad
trash.
decision to go that direction. Yeah, but I mean, it's like, what possessed you guys to make what was such a straightforward film into a very satirical film?
But I mean, if I'm gonna
And it
watch
didn't work.
Carpenter trash, I'm going to watch Big Trouble in Little China. Because let's just be
Yeah,
frank,
well, that's great. It's not trash. It's not trash.
it's
It's a great
great,
film.
but really, like the main character really isn't the
It's
main
Carpenter
character.
light. Yeah.
What?
Mm-hmm.
The main character
It's
really isn't
Carpenter
the main
light.
character. They feel like they threw everything at the
Mm-hmm.
wall to stick to it. Let's make money off of Indiana Jones. It, I just don't know where they were coming from with
Mm-hmm.
that. I did like some of the Asian mysticism in it, but yeah, to have Kurt Russell in the forefront and he's not really the main character. I mean, if you watch the movie and you just understand that he thinks he's the main character, but he's not really the
Yeah.
main
Mm-hmm.
character, it's a far better movie.
Well, it's all about Jack Barton's ego. I mean,
Yes.
that's
He's just a narcissist. He
so
keeps interrupting all the scenes with the real
exactly.
main characters. And you watch it underneath that
Well, is
guy.
there anything else?
No, no, I
Uh,
think we covered it all, and then we're gonna have to,
cool.
you mentioned, the Tombs movie, Tombs of the, Living Dead?
Oh, Tombs of the Blind Dead.
Yes, Tombs of the
I'd
Blind Dead.
love to just do something on Ozario because
Yeah,
Ozario's movies are very
because
interesting.
I've always wanted to tackle it, but I know it's a revered thing, and I've always found that it helps to
Mhm,
have somebody that has that reverence toward it. Because 'cause I'm very irreverent. I'm the type of person
mhm,
who will watch something and go, "Yeah, that was shit." But it's nice to
mhm,
have somebody to counterbalance that to go, well, here's what they were saying. Because sometimes there is stuff lost in translation, things that get
mhm.
edited out of Americanized cuts or dubs or subs. I mean, hell, if you're not watching like subtitled Japanese films, you're fucking up because you're missing a lot of the plot. Um,
Yeah. Mhm.
yes, I am a strong subs power girl when it comes down to it
Well,
over.
the thing about Italian films is by tradition they were dubbed after the fact, and
Yes.
also you had cast members that were literally reading scripts in multiple languages at the same time. So Italian vernacular cinema, it really doesn't make a difference if
Right.
you watch subs or dubbing. I enjoy, you know the subs just because I get to experience, the Italian audience, what they saw, but everybody else was getting an English dub.
It's kind of
So,
like the best way I can describe it is like I know like Pan's Labyrinth doesn't has a dub. And honestly, I mean, you
mhm,
can watch that movie without subtitles and you still kind of get the gist of the dreamlike quality of what's going on
mhm.
because Guillermo del Toro is just that good of a director, in my opinion,
Oh yeah.
hands down. But I think Pan's Labyrinth is one of those few movies, but there are so very little that can do that, which is unfortunate.
Well, on that note, number one, I want to say, I haven't talked a lot about Romero. I adore Romero. Romero is one of the great American filmmakers.
Pennsylvanian
Um,
filmmaker.
Pennsylvania filmmakers. I mean, it's definitely worth digging into his catalog. But we've been talking a lot about, where Fulci lies and the idea of Fulci riding the back of
Oh, yeah.
Romero is honestly, in my opinion, totally absurd.
Yes.
Um,
And that's why I
and
kind of wanted to separate it, because
yeah,
honestly, with what's presented in these films and what I've seen and known in the past, that yes, the Romero cycle kind of helped get these attention, but they aren't
hmm
because or in response to the Romero cycle. They're still their own thing. And
hmm
that's one of the things I always like to try to explain to people. I'm like, no, this is not the directors or the writers' intention.
hmm
But it's always going to get picked up that way because that's how it was commercialized. Because Day of the Dead
hmm
was Zombie overseas, and then of course Fulci's
hmm
Zombie got stuck with Zombie 2, and
hmm
it just makes for bad blood. And then you have all the I don't know how to describe them sequels, but yeah, you can get really confused on it. I think I have bought Fulci's Zombie no more than 5 times under at least 5 different titles.
Very true. Well, Sasha, thank you so much for having me on.
No, thank
It
you
is
for
always an
being
honor and a
on.
pleasure. Thank you.
Everybody needs to check out
So,
Ambassador Radio, FYI, and some of the content that
yeah,
he's putting on.
I'll, ambassadorradio.org. It's a music-based program, obscure, rare music, a lot of history. Um, been kicking around the radio thing for almost 30 years now. So,
And you need to do more of that album stuff, and you need to dip into some weird stuff. I
yeah,
mean, you dipped into some weird stuff,
yeah.
but I want you to get really weird with it.
After a very strange year last year, I'm now starting to work with time management. So I'm getting there.
Throw in some Wednesday 13 and Murder Dolls, and we're good.
Cool. Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you. You have a good night.
Thank you. Oh, good. I got to pee.